Hi everyone! Today we are going to talk about simplifying expressions. But before we do that, we need to look at some vocabulary first. We have 4 new words that we're going to see today, or terms that we're going to hear today. The first one is like terms, and that definition is terms that have exactly the same variable factors. So for instance, down here in the bottom, 3x, 4x, and x are all like terms because they all have the same variable, x, x, x. Okay, then we have constants, and a constant is a number without a variable. So again, if we look down here at the bottom, 3 is going to be our constant. It doesn't have a variable. It's just the numbers that we're used to seeing. The third word is going to be variable. It's a letter that represents an unknown number. So when we look at each of these x's, those x's, that letter is a variable. The next word that we're seeing is coefficient, and our coefficient is our numeric multiplier of a variable. So I have a star next to that for a reason. When we look at our terms here, our variable terms, I see the 3 and the x. The x is the variable, but that 3 is the coefficient. If we look at 4x, the x is the variable, 4 is the coefficient. But again, I have that little star there. In my last term that I'm looking at here, I see just an x. I don't see a number with it. Unlike with the 3x and the 4x where it was in front, whenever we see a variable by itself and there's no coefficient, it's an invisible coefficient of 1. So I'm going to make sure that I write that whenever I see some naked variable. All right, so before we get into simplifying, we first need to know how to simplify. Basically, when we simplify, all we have to do is remove the parentheses and collect like terms. So what is that going to look like? On example 1, we have 4x plus 9x plus 7. So when we start simplifying those, all we're going to do is look at our like terms. So our like terms, hopefully we've noticed, are 4x and 9x. And we're going to go ahead and add those two together. So 4x plus 9x is 13x. And then that 7 is just hanging out there by itself. Since it has no other like terms that go with it, I'm just going to keep it here. 13x plus 7. So our directions when we're working with expressions is always to simplify. Since 13x and 7 are not like terms, I can't go any further. Therefore, this is my answer, 13x plus 7. All right, let's look at example 2. We have 3a plus 2a plus 7 minus 4a. Again, what we need to do is collect our like terms. So I have 3a, and I'm going to add that to 2a. And because I see this negative 4a, all of those are my like terms. So I want to go ahead and add them together. 3a plus 2a is 5a. 5a minus 4a is 1a. Since there's nothing like the 7, I'm just going to go ahead and bring that down. And since we have a 1a and a 7 as a constant, and I can't combine those two, I'm just going to have this as my simplified answer, 1a plus 7. In the next set of examples that we're going to see, we're going to encounter our first trip with distributive property. So when we look at this, anytime we see parentheses with some either sign or number outside, what we need to do is multiply the number inside by whatever's outside. Since I don't have a number on the outside of my parentheses, I'm going to put an invisible 1. And now we're going to distribute. Negative 1 times a positive 6x. We know a negative times a positive is going to be a negative 6x. Negative 1 times a negative 8y, it's going to be a negative 8y because we're going to take that sign in front of it, is going to be a positive 8y. And negative 1 times a positive 5, we know that a negative times a positive will give us a negative 5. If I look to see any like terms here, I notice nothing here is like, therefore negative 6x plus 8y minus 5 is going to be my answer. So let's look at example 4. We have 9x minus 4x plus 3. Much like example 3, we notice if I cover up that 9x that it's just like the one above it. All I need to do is distribute that negative to each of the terms inside my parentheses. So that's what I'm going to start doing first. So a negative times 4x, or negative 1 times a positive 4x, will be a negative 4x. Negative 1 times a positive 3 will be a negative 3. I'm going to go ahead and bring down my 9x. And now our next step is to combine any like terms. So if I look here, I can see that 9x is like that negative 4x. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract those. 9x minus 4x we know is 5x. And since there's nothing here like this negative 3, I'm just going to go ahead and bring that down. Since 5x and negative 3 aren't like terms, I can't combine them, so this is going to be my simplified answer. Now, let's try one a little bit tougher. Let's look at example 5. So on example 5, we can see that we have 2x plus 7x minus 4x plus 6. Again, we're going to start off with those parentheses. I know that I have a 1 in front, and I'm going to multiply to remove my parentheses first. So negative 1 times a positive 4x is going to be a negative 4x. Negative 1 times a positive 6 is going to be a negative 6. Notice I write minus 6. I don't write the negative like a plus negative. We can interchange subtraction and negative. We're able to do that. Calculators have special buttons for that. Okay, now that I've distributed, I'm now going to collect my like terms. Hopefully we see that 2x, 7x, and negative 4x are all like. So I'm going to add 2x plus 7x is 9x. 9x minus 4x is 5x. And since there's nothing here like this 6, it's alone, I'm just going to bring it down. Since I can't combine my 5x and my 6, I'm going to go ahead and have 5x minus 6 as my simplified answer. Okay, so now we've done those. Hopefully it's making sense. The next two examples are going to be a little bit tougher, only because they look scary. They're not really. We're going to follow the same guidelines that we were before. So if we notice on this one, we don't just have a minus outside the parentheses. I actually have a minus 5. And I'm going to keep this negative 5 with, or I'm going to keep that negative with that 5. That's what I want to distribute. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply negative 5 times 3x. That's going to give me a negative 15x. Negative 5 times negative 2y. A negative times a negative we know is a positive 6y. And negative 5 times positive 5z. A negative times a positive is a negative 25z. I'm going to go ahead and bring down all the other terms that we didn't multiply by. We haven't seen that. Well, we have seen it. We saw it in example 4 and 5. Okay, so I brought everything else down. Now I have the job of combining our like terms. So I have 15x, which is like negative 15x, and I have no more x's. I have negative y, which is like positive 6y, and then I have poor little minus 25z all by himself. So I'm going to collect my like terms. 15x minus 15x. Well, 15 minus 15 is 0. So the answer is just going to be 0. We can cancel it out. I'm not even going to take the time to write anything. Then we have our negative y and our positive 6y. Remember, this is the invisible 1. It has that invisible coefficient. So negative 1 plus 6 is going to be 5y. And like we said, that poor little 25z was just hanging out by himself. So we're just going to bring it down. And 5y minus 25z, since our variables are not the same, we cannot combine them anymore. And this is going to be our simplified answer. Okay, So let's look at our next example. Notice that they're getting larger. So on example 7, we can see, yes, this is a huge problem. We not only have one parentheses, but 2 sets of parentheses. So I'm going to work with them. On the first one, we have negative 8x plus 5y minus 12, and then minus 6 times 2x minus 4y minus 10. Since there's no number here that I can see, if we want, we can go ahead and put a 1 here and distribute that 1 everywhere. But again, multiplying anything by 1 is just going to leave us with what we started with. So I'm just going to rewrite that. On the other parenthesis, though, we see that we have a negative 6 on the outside. So we're going to go ahead and multiply negative 6 times a positive 2x, which will give me a negative 12x. Negative 6 times a negative 4y, we know that 2 negatives are going to be a positive 24y. And negative 6 times negative 10 will give us a positive 60. Now we have the task of combining our like terms. So I see negative 8x and a negative 12x. I see a positive 5y and a positive 24y. And yay, finally the constants have pairs. I see a negative 12 and a positive 60. So I'm going to combine those parts together. So first, we have negative 8x and a negative 12. When we're adding same signs, remember, we add the numbers and keep the sign. So this will leave me with negative 20x. For our y's, we have 5y plus 24y. We're going to go ahead and add those two together and get 29y. And lastly, we have negative 12 and a positive 60. Remember, different signs, we have to subtract them. So 60 minus 12 is 48, and it will be a positive 48. Now that we have our simplified terms, I notice nothing here is like. Therefore, negative 20x plus 29y plus 48 is going to be my answer.